Restaurant Unstoppable. What the most successful restaurateurs know that you don't. And with excitement, allow me to introduce to you today's guest, Jennifer Weishaupt. Are you feeling unstoppable, Jennifer?
I am feeling unstoppable today.
Yes, that is what we like to hear. So, trained engineers Erich and Jennifer Weishaupt had no plans to open a restaurant. That all changed when a friend purchased a property in their community and asked them to run a breakfast restaurant there. They took the challenge head on and leveraged their years of experience with critical thinking in project management to revitalize the mid-city New Orleans neighborhood in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. 12 years later, they've scaled the Ruby Slipper to 18 locations throughout the Gulf Coast under the brand of Ruby Slipper and Ruby Sunshine. In addition, Jennifer has served on the board of directors of Liberty's Kitchen. The Ruby Slipper has been named one of Forbes magazine's Inner City 100 for 3 years. It was also named a breakout brand by Nation's Restaurant News in 2017, and I cannot wait to dive into your story. With no experience in the restaurant industry prior to opening this and achieving what you've achieved, I have a feeling it's going to be a good one. But let's get that motivational, inspirational ball rolling with a success quote or mantra. What do you got for us?
For me, my focus in the restaurant industry is always about the people.
Always about
If you
people.
focus on your people and you put your people first, they'll put your guests first, and ultimately you're going to be successful.
Yes, great way to get this thing started. I don't think we need to dissect that anymore. Pretty straightforward. Where does your story make sense to start sharing? How far back do we want to go?
I think people are always interested in that beginning, kind of how did you make that decision? And, you have to realize this was in a year, kind of about a year or so after Hurricane Katrina.
Yep.
Our neighborhood had flooded. Our house was destroyed. All our neighbors' homes. Everybody was in rebuilding. And in New Orleans, rebuilding, really still continues to this day. So it's a very long process. There had been this building in the neighborhood that had been blighted and really a nuisance leading up to the hurricane. And then after the hurricane, the owner was finally willing to sell it. We had always told our neighbor who wanted to buy it, like, hey, if you ever get that space, find somebody to open a breakfast restaurant because I like to eat breakfast and I want to go eat some breakfast someplace. Yeah. One of the, I guess, life learnings of Hurricane Katrina was that sometimes the somebody you were looking for had to be yourself because everybody was stretched so thin and really just at the end of their rope. So my husband's an electrical engineer. I'm a chemical engineer. We both worked in oil and gas in our careers. And we just basically said, like, okay, you're an engineer. What are you going to do? You're going to research it. You're going to learn about it. So we went on the internet. We literally subscribed to restaurantowner.com website and got
Jim
the
Laub,
magazine.
Good
I know.
friend here of Restaurant Unstoppable.
Yes,
She's been on the show a couple of times.
Read everything we could. My husband did all the design and construction, and I did, kind of the employee manual and the policies and how do you build a schedule and what your budget should look like and all that kind of stuff. And so we basically, as engineers, we approached it in the way we'd approach project management and problem solving.
I want to get into that real quick, but where do you think you would have been without restaurantowner.com?
I don't even know where we would have started.
Yeah, and I'm only saying because they've been organically recommended so many times on the show, and they're great people, friends of Restaurant Unstoppable, and I know that they're giving their services away for free right now through September, or maybe it's 3 months. I'll address this in the closing thowoughts, but we'll definitely link to restaurantowner.com because it's an incredible resource.
The resources, even to this day, we still are members 12 years later, probably 13 years because we had it for about a year before we actually opened. And it's literally like, hey, how do I write a labor schedule for back of house and how much should I spend? How do I do a sales projection? What's the rule of thumb on how much I should spend in my lease? You know, and so as engineers, we just basically took all that stuff and we're like, well, if this is what the book says, that's what we're going to do. And we just made it all
It's
work.
an aiming point. It gives you a clue. It has something that it gives you something to aim for. And beyond that, just templates galore.
Yeah.
So you don't have to go out there and recreate everything. You can plug things into your business that have already been created, spreadsheets, checklists, things of this nature, and make it your own over time and improve upon it to make it custom for your business. But you need a starting point, right?
Yeah.
Thank you for going further into that. It's a great resource. And you started talking, and I just want to mention this. If you guys do use our link in the show notes, you will get that 3 months free. So make sure you're using our link. I just want to make sure people know that. Moving forward, you mentioned that you're taking this engineer approach. Can you just break down, like, for some of us who aren't familiar with what that is? So, like, what does it mean? What is the engineer approach?
So I guess I would start by saying kind of project management. So saying, what are the things you're trying to accomplish, and then breaking them down into manageable tasks.
Okay.
So for example, in the design and construction, my husband would work on, here's the overall space and who's somebody I can talk to about what's the ratio of dining to kitchen space. And then this is what I want to serve in my kitchen. Who can help me figure out what the layout should be? And then, having checklists that really give you that. If you're going to open on, in our case, it was like May 1st, 2008, how do you back up from that? How many days, weeks, months? When do you need to get insurance in place? When do you need to get a permit? When do you need to have that contractor hired? And so really going in very much step by step in those processes. And then on the other side, where I was doing the operations, it's like, well, what should be in an employee manual? What's important policies that you want to have in place? In a lot of instances, because we had both come from fairly, very large multinational companies, we had a high expectation on, kind of practices, protocols, behaviors. And so we put those things in place from the beginning. So I think we avoided a lot of pitfalls that people run into because they may not have a policy around it. So, for people coming to work for us, like, what do you mean you have an employee manual? Like,
what?
You're not even open yet. It's like, well, we figured you'd want, you want to know what the parameters are. What are the guardrails,
out there.
right?
Like, you can get these things if you're open. Even before day one, like, you can get these things. Like, we already mentioned the tools; they're out there for sure. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. So then I would say, kind of, from an engineering project management standpoint, there's like a weekly cadence of, what do you do on Monday? What do you do on Wednesday? What do you do on Fridays? That lets you know you're on track or you're behind schedule and how you're going to close the gap. So it's really that kind of project management process.
Yeah.
And then the analytical, just thinking about as you encounter issues, okay, solution A wasn't going to work. I'm not going to let it deter me. Now I need to find a plan B or a plan C and try those things until you find a solution that does work.
Yeah, the words that are coming through my mind right now, and I think it's one of those 7 habits of highly effective people, start with the end in mind.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Start with the end in mind and work backwards. What needs to happen between now and then to get there with the job done look right, and then you just work backwards and reverse engineer.
Yeah.
Easier said than done, for sure, but it's definitely the right approach. How long did it take you to do that? I mean, we're kind of getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, like, because we haven't really even talked about your career and like the key mentors you had. Were you happy as an engineer?
Yeah,
or?
I love my job. I love the company I worked for. I was very successful. I stayed with that company for 7 additional years.
I saw that.
And so, we initially hired a manager, an experienced restaurant manager and all experienced staff. And then my husband really kind of got in shoulder to shoulder and learned the business.
Okay.
I worked a schedule where I was off every other Friday. So I'd usually work that Friday that I was off from my primary job. And then I would go in on the weekends as well.
Okay.
So we both learned the business from the host perspective, the server's perspective, the cook's perspective, the bartender's perspective, and could do all of those positions. It was a small 52-seat restaurant.
Yeah. I want to break this down a little more, but I'm curious, before we really dive in and start dissecting your business, anybody in your life, mentors, people, I like to say behind every great restaurant's a great person. So I like to really kind of dissect who had an influence on you and what shaped you into the woman you are today. So reflecting back in your career in engineering, was there one person that kind of gave you these hard skills or
I would say I worked for Shell Oil Company, which is, largest or second largest in the world. And what I would say in that type of environment, you change jobs typically every 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
And I was very fortunate that they were highly focused on developing people. And so particularly if you were identified as a high potential employee, where they thought, you kind of get up in the ranks over the course of your career, there was really a lot of training, mentoring, leadership development, those sorts of things. So while a few people do stand out in the course of that, 16-year career that I had with the company, I would say it was kind of their overall approach to how you develop leaders and, kind of giving people autonomy and challenging them on their weaknesses, but playing to their strengths. And, that really set me up for success and then gave me the mindset of like, okay, I can figure this out.
So the big takeaways I'm getting from how to develop a leader is playing to their strengths, challenging their weaknesses, maybe making them more self-aware of their weaknesses so they can
work on them, right?
Or just be mindful of it
right.
so they can maybe compensate with somebody else
right.
who's strong where they're weak. But why is autonomy so important in that equation?
I think because in order to be successful, you ultimately have to be comfortable with failure. Yeah. So autonomy is what lets you make decisions and fail. And then it doesn't mean you take your toys and go home. It means like, well, okay, I failed that time. What am I going to do differently this time? And how am I going to recover from it? And it builds that resilience.
Yeah. What exactly is autonomy?
I mean, to me, it's more about, what are the things that you have the authority to make decisions over? And what are you entrusted with from the business perspective? And so therefore you can take a level of ownership with it and make great decisions that are a balance between, kind of what the business needs and wants and, what the team that you might be supporting at that time needs and wants.
When I think of autonomy too, I think it's just free will, the power of free will and being able to make your own decisions and what that does for you emotionally.
Right.
Because when things do hit the fan, you only have one person to blame, right?
Right.
And I think it helps with like, I don't know, do you think that plays into it?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Like definitely accountability, a sense of ownership, building that resilience because you'll make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, right? And then it's more about like, how do you recover from the mistake? What do you do different next time? And that builds you as a leader.
Yeah. And if you execute that, and it was your autonomy that got you there, and like, what does that do for your ego?
Right. You're like, I helped do this.
Yeah, exactly. Being seen for what you contribute. It's so powerful. Did I see you? So I know you mentioned you're working for Shell. Were you, what was it that I had notes in here.
My husband and I started flipping houses I actually started with a friend of mine before I knew my husband,
what
in the late
this?
90s.
Late 90s.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, that was really my first, like dipping my foot into the high risk world of entrepreneurship.
Okay.
So I would say when you say kind of who's influenced you, my friend that I went into that endeavor with, which was really a way for me to buy a house I could live in and not rent, but I could afford in a neighborhood I felt safe living in, and for her to have an investment property, and kind of starting an LLC and then having tenants and managing the books and all those sorts of things. It was that first step in. And once we did it, we were like, oh, we actually can do this and make money. Okay, let's buy another house. And then, I probably got married by maybe the third house.
Okay.
And then my husband got involved in the business, and we got a couple other partners that joined us, and we all had jobs, so this was our kind of nights and weekends back in the heyday of house flipping.
Okay.
So when
I think
properties were cheap.
Yeah, there's some definite lessons to pull out of that. But what I had on my mind, you were in food production, right? Like enchiladas and salsa. Is that what I remember seeing in my research? That you were in the supply chain, or you're producing this, or did I read that wrong?
No, I'm trying to think what you would have read. Because in my career in Shell, I did operations work, I did health, safety, environmental work, and I managed like offshore platforms, and my husband worked in the offshore oil field as well.
So encounters with enchiladas.
I did have, so we said at the beginning I didn't have any restaurant experience, and I do want to correct that my first job at age 14 back home in New York was at McDonald's.
Okay.
And I worked at McDonald's for 2 years. And, it's kind of one of those things that I always look back on now and a little bit laugh and say, I actually learned everything I really needed to know about the restaurant business. I learned in those 2 years because those systems at McDonald's are just so tight.
Exactly. And that's what they that's what they've mastered is streamline, is systems, processes, procedures. So you can learn so much by spending 2 years at or operation like
Fry,
McDonald's,
cook, and
for
cashier,
sure, right? Okay, but the other thing that I love about your story is this idea of multiple channels of revenue. And I feel like so many people get into the restaurant industry and they don't have anything else. So you were still working your full-time job. You had that security, that paycheck, that insurance, all these things. And you were flipping houses. So you had that other side hustle that were you doing all three of these things at once?
So my husband had left his job in 2003 to go full-time into house flipping. And so he was finding, kind of rundown houses, historic houses, doing, very modern renovations to them and reselling them or renting them out. So he was managing that piece of our lives. I had my full-time job, and then we started the restaurant. And we were fortunate that, first of all, our investment in the restaurant was extremely low compared to what it cost us to get into a restaurant today.
Yeah.
And we self-funded it entirely from the profits that we were making in our real estate business. And so the way that we had approached it, which I think is also a bit of an engineering mindset, was that when we started that house flipping business, we never changed our lifestyle. So we always lived off of my salary, and everything else could be reinvested in the businesses. So when we made money on a property, we used that profit to buy 2 more houses. And then when you made the money from those 2 houses, you bought 4 more houses, right? So similarly, when we decided we were going to go into the restaurant business and we kind of budgeted out, we took money out of that real estate business and invested it to start the new LLC that was the new restaurant business. And we never had to take a loan. And ultimately, that's how we also grew the business. We self-funded.
I love what you're dropping on us right now. And I think people get into so much trouble in the early days because they don't have those multiple channels of revenue, or they go to somebody and they get all their money from an investor, and then you're just tied. Like, you have this person, like it becomes an obligation, a liability, right, that you have to this person. And then they might want, and if you don't have a good partnership agreement, it just gets weird, right? So why is this, in your opinion, is this the best approach? Maybe you don't think it is the best approach, but do you think it's the best approach?
I think for us, it was one of the things that really made us successful. And it was the learning. We had partners in our real estate business originally. And what we learned over time, while we're still friends with those people, your aspirations and, kind of how you want to run the business, what do you want to do with the money, the profits, et cetera, will inevitably change over time because people have lots of other things going on in their lives, right? And so as those ideas ebb and flow, you won't all be aligned, or you won't be as aligned as you were on day one necessarily. So when we were going into the restaurant business, we were really clear that we wanted it to just be us. And we never intended to build beyond that first location. So for us, it was, this is what we're going to invest. We're going to open this one restaurant. We hope that it breaks even. That was our financial goal going into the business. And we were, on an operating standpoint, we were in the black in week 1.
Nice.
Of course, we had a investment we had to pay back, but we paid back that investment to ourselves, I think, in about 12 to 18 months.
So you pay back the investment to yourself. So you had one company that you're essentially getting the money from. Are you tracking all this money? Was this like
so
a
we
loan?
Basically we pulled the profit out of the one company, and then that you funded the second company with.
So were you doing this as if it wasn't like just, I'm sure you're tracking this money, you're accounting for it. Like, how are you moving this money around in a way that is, I guess, professional, for lack of a better term?
In both companies, they're LLCs. And so as the partners in an LLC, we already paid taxes on that. It doesn't matter whether you take the money out or not. If you make profit, right, if you have earnings, you pay taxes on that. So we could have theoretically taken the money out at any point, but you do have to represent like a capital withdrawal. And so from a tax standpoint, your CPA or your bookkeeper will help you represent, this is how much equity I have in this business. Well, let's just say I took about $150,000 out. I'm taking this $150,000 of equity out of that business, and now I'm starting this other business with $150,000 of equity. And so it's really represented kind of on the balance sheet side.
Okay. Is this like vertical integration? Are you making a profit on that loan? Is one business profiting? Or
No, because we didn't consider it a loan. We basically considered it like us withdrawing our capital from one and then using it to self-fund another one.
Got you.
So when I say paid ourselves back, I mean it in the mental space of how long does it take for you to earn enough profit in this business that you've now
to regain your loss,
regained what you invested in it,
Okay.
right? And a lot of companies work on a 3-year return on investment ROI is kind of a typical, that's a solid, good performance. In the case of that first restaurant, it was paid back very quickly.
So were you just mentally
No,
tracking?
we didn't actually take the money.
Okay.
We kept the money there because we didn't know what we wanted to do with it.
Did you actually pay back
Yeah,
your other company?
no.
Because I mean, I would have if there's like
No,
some
we
kind
didn't
of
need
tax
it.
benefit
Yeah,
or
no,
something
we
like
didn't.
that.
We didn't need it in the other company. So.
Got you. But again, just the idea of multiple channels of revenue, starting where you can, and it sounds like you got a sweetheart deal. Like, what was the initial investment? Was it only $150,000?
It was about $150,000 because we had to do the build out.
Okay.
So the build out of the building was the most expensive, and then of course there's like the furniture, the fixtures,
What was
the
the building?
equipment.
Before? Was it just empty?
It was a corner store, like a little convenience store that was in the neighborhood, kind of on a side street in our neighborhood, and they sold like drinks and snacks and sandwiches, that kind of stuff.
So it had a counter.
Yep.
And how much
exactly.
of that original footprint was there when you guys opened your spot?
So we kept, in terms of the footprint, we kept it all. We didn't modify the footprint, but we did add a wall to separate the we had to build out the bathrooms and add the wall to separate our kitchen from the dining area, and then refinish the floors. My husband, he was essentially, everybody was redoing their houses, and so he's constantly driving around, and whenever he'd see like really good wood that somebody had pulled out of their house, he'd be throwing it at my house. My backyard used to be full of junk. But like he did those floors with floorboards he salvaged that someone else was throwing out from Katrina, and he salvaged these like historic fireplace mantles that he brought in as part of the decor, and then he salvaged what we call barge board, which is kind of the wood that they built the inside of walls of houses, and he built the bar out of that. So there was all these really cool like salvaged wood elements that came out of other houses in our neighborhood that were being like reconstructed from the flood.
You can do it on a budget.
Yes. And my husband did most of the work,
Yeah,
right?
So what are some of the key takeaways, some of the key lessons you can share with us on how to do it on a budget?
The first piece is have a budget,
Yeah.
right? Like start with a budget and know.
Again, starting with
what
the end
can
in
you
mind.
right?
This is
Like
what
if
we
you
have.
say I want to repay this in 3 years, you have to know your numbers. So if your goal is to pay yourself back in 3 years, or to meet back what that investment was, you have to know, like, are you going to take a salary or not? Are you going to hire a salaried person? What approximately is going to be your labor spend? What's approximately going to be your food spend? And then how are you projecting your sales by knowing, some competitors, what's reasonable versus of like, what are you going to do in sales on a Tuesday versus a Sunday in the breakfast and brunch business? And then being handy and having skills always helps. So since my husband had been doing all these renovations, he was highly skilled to be able to kind of manage the project. So he could manage the electrician and manage the plumber and, work with the folks who were putting in the hood and, putting in the equipment and things like that. So it definitely makes it much more affordable when you're closely managing the project, and you're really also watching, are you getting what you paid for, right? And so I think that's a situation a lot of times that people are in, if they do have a full-time job and they're trying to build something like this on the side, is like you're not always there to put your eyes on it, and you really have to have a very firm schedule of meeting with that contractor, making sure that they're doing the work to the specs that they agreed to, and they're giving you the product that you paid for ultimately.
Awesome. I love this. I really do. And you mentioned that you were working full time. You're probably spending, what was it, like 3 days a week, you said? You'd alternate Fridays?
I'd spend like a Friday and then some time on the weekends.
Okay.
Kind of half day. We didn't have any kids yet at the time, so.
And you said your dad or your husband was full time in the restaurant, correct?
Yeah, he was still flipping houses until about 4 years in. Finally, when we opened the third restaurant, or we were about to open the third restaurant was when I finally had the sit them down and have the talk. Like, you really have to be here all full time, because now it's a business. So now it's for real.
Yeah, this is kind of one of the things I'm like,
right.
I'm trying to get into. You guys were able to open a restaurant with basically 2 full-time jobs, right? How do you go about, like, how do you do that without living in your business? You hear people saying, like, oh, the first year you're going to be there 60 hours a week. You were there maybe 30 hours a week, right?
So, I would say a couple specific things. One, which was a recommendation we got from, we didn't have a lot of friends who are in the restaurant industry, but we had a few, and we definitely went to them with a lot of questions. And one here in New Orleans who worked for a very well-known single location of an upscale restaurant with a very well-known chef. He gave us some great advice, which was open 5 days a week, at least initially. And this particular restaurant that he worked for still was only 5 days a week after decades. And he said things break. Having those 2 days when you have that downtime and you can get away from your business and like everybody's off is really going to help you keep your mental space clear. And so we started 5 days a week, and I feel like it was at least a year, if not almost 2 years, before we expanded to 6 days and then eventually expanded to 7 days.
But I guess what else do you need other than, if you're not there, what needs to be there to
you have to have
execute?
Like a highly qualified people to help you. So for example, with us, neither of us is a chef or has a culinary background. We like to eat a lot. So we knew what we wanted on the menu. We just didn't know how to say, these are the things we want to eat. How do I actually turn this into a recipe and a spec and execute it in a kitchen? So we did hire basically like a kitchen chef consultant who helped us take those ideas we had written on paper and develop them into, this is what the original menu is going to look like. We eventually hired that person to be the restaurant manager, much more like kitchen focused, but my husband was there. When my husband was there, he's usually, kind of in the front of house. So they worked hand in hand, and things didn't work out long term with that individual. It was probably, 5 or 6 months after we opened that we parted ways. And then we hired the next person. We were really looking for somebody who had really strong front of house experience as well, from the, guest experience and guest service side.
So do you think you were able to find people that you could lean on like this because of the time? Do you think the timing was right? Because in 2008, 9, 10, was there a lot of opportunity because people were out of a lot of work? Was it easier to find people?
It was, I definitely do not feel like we had the hiring struggles. There also was not a lot of breakfast, brunch focused restaurants at that time. We were really on the kind of front end of that curve, which is, of course, very popular right now. And there's a lot of competitors in the space, but we were much more on that front end. And so it's a very attractive schedule for a lot of experienced hospitality folks who are, they've just got burnt out on those late nights and being away from their family, particularly you get to that age where they have a family and the family has a more traditional, weekday 9 to 5 schedule and they're missing it. This schedule is very attractive. So I felt like in our first several restaurants, we always got, generally got really solid managers and hourly staff because they wanted that daytime life experience.
That makes sense. And I feel like we've been tiptoeing around it, but you've mentioned it a few times, the significance of systems and processes, procedures. What do we need to know about implementing those? How do we know those things are being done when we're not there?
Right. So I would say the first thing is having them, right? Yep. So having them be written down, so when you're in the back of house, it's about, what are your recipe specs and how do you check that people follow them? Are they doing prep lists? Are they, prep to shelf life? What are the pars you need on a Saturday versus a Tuesday? Those are the things that, in this case, like the chef consultant helped us really develop. And then in the front of house, it's all about, the steps of service. So in that first batch of people that we hired, we had several highly experienced servers who came from another breakfast concept that was, kind of across town from us. And they really stepped in and said, hey, this is what we suggest that we put in place. So we kind of put in that, we trained everybody together, following some steps of service that were, I guess the way I would always describe it is like elevated casual dining. We want people to feel like they're getting that, very comfortable, very familiar experience. We want them to, we want the server to know their name. We want them to know what they want to eat, what they want to drink, and that sort of stuff, and have that rapport with the guest. But we want to give them like a great food experience side of that as well.
Okay.
So take that level of care in the food so that it's not diner food, the differentiation of like, this is not a diner.
Yeah. So what was it like, well, before we get into that, reflecting back at that first 2 years, you said it took about 2 years until one of you was there more full time, right? Until you
it was really
expanding.
Almost 4 years before my husband was 100% full time.
Yeah.
But
anything like reflecting back at that time, knowing what you know now, that you would have done differently if you had known it then?
I think I don't know that I would have done anything different in those early years, because the person that we brought in who kind of took that operational leadership role was really highly skilled. Unfortunately, that person stayed with us for he left and then came back to us and ultimately worked for us for 8 or 9 years. And unfortunately, there was a pretty negative falling out that occurred subsequently that probably lends a lot to, kind of life lessons, is just how much you should entrust someone with your business. Like, you still have to keep, no matter what, you really have to always know your own numbers and always, really monitor and make sure that, your team knows they still work for you, and that you are ultimately the one that they feel the connection with. So never let yourself get so disconnected from the business that somebody else can kind of undermine your position and relationship to the staff.
Okay. So what checks and balances can we put in place to make sure that we're tracking and keeping our thumb on the financials and all these things?
So I think there's really, it's kind of back to that idea of what I usually call like routine and standard work. So what are the things you do? How do you write your calendar that you live your work life by, that says like, every morning I look at these numbers, or every evening I look at these numbers, and I read this end of shift report and I ask these questions. You eventually could get to a size like we did where I couldn't look at every shift report every day. And that was probably around 8 to 10 restaurants. Then, my brain was going to explode.
Yeah.
But really knowing, in those instances, like my husband signed every single check up until about 1.5 years ago. So when you're the one signing the checks, you know who the checks are going to, there's no funny business, like, hey, this amount for this vendor seems out of line. Why is this bill so high this week? Those sorts of things. So there's, having those routines, really looking at like for us, we used prime cost as our real tracking measure. And so we put that in place very early on, where we had a prime cost goal and we had our managers input and track in an Excel spreadsheet. That was a template that I got from restaurantowner.com.
Yep.
That, what was their labor and what was their food cost spend.
So prime cost, for anybody who doesn't know, is your total expenses for food, right? And your total expenses for labor.
Right. It's your two biggest levers that you actually have some level of control over, right? Like, you can't control your rent once you sign that lease. Once you sign for insurance, it is what it is. There's other things that are controllable but at a lesser level, like utilities, but food cost and labor cost are the two levers that you can really move around and move the dial, influence, in order to run a successful business.
Got you. So you're tracking your prime costs.
On a daily basis. We were tracking prime cost and then really like meeting and discussing it on a weekly basis once we had multiple restaurants.
Got it. I'm loving this conversation, but you're getting into like the nitty gritty, the details, and this is the stuff we love. Anything we haven't discussed up to 2 or 3 locations that would be of value to our listeners before pressing forward?
I think the other thing, even at one location, that adds a lot of value and that helped to build our culture is, one is presence. So it's really about leadership presence. And are you there? Do your people know you? And do you know your people? And secondly, how do you communicate with your leadership team, and how do you communicate with your full staff? And do people feel like there's a dialogue, and when they raise an issue, it gets addressed, or at least they get a response? So for us, this probably goes back to more of that engineering mindset and practices that we had in our, big multinational companies, but having weekly management team meetings where we were looking at those numbers and saying, hey, this looks kind of off. We overspent on seafood. What can we do next week to get that cost down?
So you would share your numbers with your team?
With the managers, yes.
And in what depth would you share those numbers? Like how much of those numbers would you share with them?
We would really look at the details of that. Not the full profit and loss statement, because, they didn't need to know what the insurance costs were, things like that they couldn't have control. Okay. But really around that food, those labor costs, even utilities, where if suddenly the water bill went up, you found there's a faucet dripping. Hey, look, by not spending $100 on a plumber to fix this faucet, we spent $300 on water.
Yeah.
And making people aware of things like that, or having your simple things like having your thermostats on a program and running a timed program, so you're not air conditioning your building when nobody's in there.
Exactly.
So, those are some of the practices. And then really in that meeting, focusing on people. So, you have to look at the numbers. You always have to look at the numbers, but ultimately, where are you at with your staffing? And do you have somebody you're having an issue with? And what's the issue? How are you working through it? Maybe you're seeing business grow. You need to hire another cook or 2 more servers or whatever it might be. Or somebody brought up an idea of hey, we could add this cocktail, or hey, we can add this menu item, talking through those. So just having a really routine set meeting with a small agenda to keep you on track.
Okay. I'm happy you mentioned the small agenda because I feel like you could probably give us some advice on how to conduct an efficient meeting. What does that look like? Because I feel like meetings, we can get lost in meetings sometimes. We just end up having a meeting for every little thing. We end up having 5 meetings a week, and what's the best approach to meetings in your opinion?
So I think it's really about focus. I mean, my personal preference, I love meetings that are less than an hour, ideally is 30 to 45 minutes. And people have to know what's expected in the meeting ahead of time so that they come prepared.
So have an agenda.
Right. You have an agenda. It should be a pretty consistent, I would call it a standing agenda, right? It has maybe 3 or 4 bullet points. For us, we work around the concept of 4 Ps. So the bullet points we always focus on are people, profit, PR and marketing, and place. And place is either growth or repairs and maintenance. It's the buildings.
Do we get mentioned in that PR meeting by any chance?
Yeah.
Nice.
So if you have and as an example, those 4 things, and when you're talking about profit and you're in the restaurant level, you're talking about, hey, your target for hourly labor was 16%, but you ran 18%. Let's look at what we could do to change the schedule next week to, it's usually slicing off 15 minutes here and there. It's not cutting a whole person.
Yeah.
And so helping to mentor and coach your team to make those efficiency tweaks that are going to get you there.
And what's the power when you get people weighing in, when you get all these minds adding to the common goal? What happens? I'm assuming, I don't want to make too many assumptions, but it sounds like there's a weigh-in opportunity here from your team.
Yeah. So for us, initially it was a very small team. Then, 2 locations, 3 locations, we would all meet together. So they would have their own meeting for their restaurant. And then, once a week, we'd have kind of a group meeting with just the highest level managers. I think for us, one of the really critical collaborative pieces that came up was always about best practices. When somebody was really good at running labor, as an example, and that person can share not the real tactics, hey, what I do is on Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays, I don't bring the dishwasher in until an hour later, and that saves me, $30 in the week. And ultimately on my weekdays, that's helping my labor by this much. It's those small tactics that are specific that people can really wrap their minds around that will make them make the change versus their, kind of leader who's just telling them hey, go figure it out.
Yeah. And again, the model to your meetings, and I think this is great. You have the 4 Ps: people, profit, PR, marketing, which is one, and then what was the last one?
And place, which is like repairs and maintenance, and in our case, growth, because we have new places that we started growing towards, right? And so that would be, kind of things we'd focus on. And then we actually, the way we do our meetings, we rotate that theme. So it's like week 1 of the month is people, and week 2 is PR, and week 3 is profit, and week 4 is place. And so a different person owns each of those meetings as we grew, right? So ultimately we have an HR director and they own people, and we have a CFO and she owns the profit one. And so they come to that meeting prepared. At the restaurant level, it's smaller, but if they're going to have a conversation about profit, which is really looking at sales versus expenses, the kitchen manager has to come prepared to know, how did I run on back of house labor this week? How did we do versus our sales projections? The GM has to be able to say, this is what we projected last week versus what we did, and this is what I'm projecting for next week, and this is why. So I need you to make these changes in your schedule, or I need you to up your ordering pars, or I need you to really cut back because we over-ordered in this area and we have plenty of product that's going to get us for the next 3 days.
I love this. I'm loving the detail. Thank you so much. I hope you know that I'm smiling underneath this mask right now. So again, I think this is like the kind of things that go back to being an engineer, because in the engineering world, it's all about the details, and you get into the details and you help people understand why the details matter. Exactly, and they compound. All those details compound for sure. So what was that trend? The one thing I really want to talk about is this transition during this time. You went to your full-time job to being full-time at the restaurant. Was that an awkward transition?
Yeah, it was. So that happened right as we opened our 5th restaurant location. So at that time we had 4 restaurants in New Orleans, and we opened our 5th location in Pensacola, Florida, in downtown Pensacola, in a really, very nice revitalized downtown area. And that was
how long of a drive was that for you?
It's 3 hours, door to door, 3 hours. And so for us, it was that, like, let's test this concept. So few things, we knew that in the world of kind of post-Katrina New Orleans, there was a whole lot of love for this city that came from not just all over the country, but all over the world. And a lot of people came to visit, and they came to spend money, and they came to, kind of see the rebirth of this city. And so we had been highly successful in those 4 locations in a way that was like, there was no charts that were going to tell you this is how you were going to do. And so a piece of us always said, like, is this just because, there's so many tourists that visit New Orleans, and we've had this, real influx of money post-Katrina, and we're on the front of this breakfast and brunch curve that's, kind of a big rising segment. And do people in other places drink mimosas at 7 a.m.? Because we don't know the answer to that. We only know what happens in New Orleans. So we chose Pensacola kind of as our test market to say, is this a concept that we should continue to grow? And it was a place we wanted to go visit. That's how we picked it. It was like, where do I want to spend time if it's not going to be here? Yeah. And I kind of drew like a 3-hour driving radius, and Pensacola was the best place in that radius.
Yeah. So real quick, as far as scaling goes, you mentioned at the very beginning of the episode that you had no intention, or we mentioned you had no intention to even open one restaurant, but it kind of the opportunity presented itself. You had no intention to scale that one location either. What changed that made you want to scale this thing?
I would say it was maybe the lure of the success. Like the first location did so well. We received so many accolades. We had, so many regulars who just really loved, like we had become part of their family and part of their like family routine and their life. And we, when people did have a complaint, and if you kind of go back to that time frame is kind of the early days of Yelp. Right. And so, I'm like learning about Twitter and learning about Yelp and, reading every review and getting really upset when it's not 4 or 5 stars and taking everything personally. But inevitably, most reviews that had anything negative mentioned the long wait. So as we, kind of got started within, 2 or 3 months, we had 45 to 60-minute waits outside the restaurant all day Saturday, all day Sunday. And it was a little bit like a party while people were waiting outside. Yeah. And, kind of being on the wait became part of the experience. But it wasn't anything we had anticipated. We had no idea that there would be this overwhelming, kind of support and followers and fans and all that. So people would always say, when are you going to open the next one? When are you going to open the next one? And we'd kind of laugh. You know, we had a young child at the time. It's like, yeah, I don't really know if, you know, we really want to do that. And then, you know, my husband starts looking for real estate, and he's like one of the luckiest people I've ever met. He stumbles upon this great piece of real estate that's in Craigslist, and was like a complete steal from the rent standpoint. It was already a restaurant that had failed, and so we went in and renovated it for about $60,000.
Was it turnkey as far as like the equipment and things?
Yes,
needed?
everything. I mean, we did about $60,000 worth of work and some new equipment, because the equipment was in pretty bad shape, a lot of it. But I think my GM there, we opened that one in December 2010, so we're in our 10th year. 2 years after the first location. So we're almost at year 10 now. We just passed year 9, or we're at 9.5. Right before COVID started, she told me that the very last cooler that was original to when we took that building over in 2010 finally bit the dust and had to get replaced. So that was a really good investment. And that like $60,000 investment is our highest revenue, highest profitability, highest flow through restaurant, and we have in the company.
I think there's an underlying lesson there that like you don't need to be chomping at the bit to expand. Like if you have something good, be patient, like, look at the market, and when you have the right opportunity, like don't rush. Like
right.
If you got something good going on, like there's no rush to get it out there.
Yeah. And again, like it was building the demand. So then we opened that second location. It was a big deal. People were like, finally, you opened a second location.
Well, that was my next question. Was this second location, like as far as strategic location wise, like how far was it from your original?
It's about 2 miles from the original, and it's the Ruby Slipper that most people know because it's in downtown New Orleans, a block off of Canal Street, and
this is the one that was shut down for a while because of the collapsed building, right?
No. That's on Canal Street itself, and those two are about 6 blocks apart from each other. Okay. So the one on Canal is our fourth location. So this one, we call it a magazine. It's like 200 Magazine Street in downtown New Orleans, and it's kind of a block off the main thoroughfare, and became really popular, particularly with tourists, because there's a ton of hotels there, and it's kind of on the way to the convention center.
So I guess what I was going with this is a lot of people would be afraid of cannibalizing their own business by putting some restaurants so close to each other, but it sounds like you were probably losing business because people didn't want to stay in the line.
Yeah.
So like because you had so much demand in that community at 2 miles apart, you can service more people. And I don't always. It kind of reminds me of P. Terry's in Austin, Texas. They were literally like opening restaurants like not too far from each other, because sometimes people just literally don't want to cross a bridge. They don't go over the other side of the bridge.
There's like natural boundaries in people's mind.
So yeah, that's interesting. So as far as scaling beyond 2 to 3 locations, you start going to 4 and 5 and 6. How did your business start to change, and how did you evolve with that change? And we can pause here.
No, I was just going to say, then our third restaurant's like 1.5 miles from that second restaurant. We ended up building 4 restaurants within like 2 miles of each other.
Was it centrifugal
force? Yes.
Or no, I think it's like centrifugal circles or something, or centered circles. The idea
concentric.
Of like concentric circles. Thank you. When scaling, but hyper focus and slowly scaling out. Yeah. Growth comes from the inside out.
Right.
So as you start to fragment yourself early on, like it's harder to like have that same presence in all those locations, right?
Yeah.
But you finally did kind of get outside your bubble with Pensacola.
And so we went to Pensacola, and at that time, it was kind of clear to me that the business was getting big enough that one person, my husband, couldn't run the business alone. So either we were going to have to hire a higher level person to help him run the business, or I should go help him run the business. At that time, it just so happened was when the oil price really tanked in 2015. And so I was very lucky to have the opportunity to raise my hand and voluntarily leave Shell after 16 years and get a really nice package that helped me on my way.
I bet.
And so that helped make the transition much better. But, kind of where you started the question from, was it a difficult or awkward transition? It really was. I did not want to come run this business. That was not my life's dream.
Yeah.
And I really loved the job that I had and what I saw as my career trajectory there. And so I was probably, kind of pouting about it for 6, 12, maybe even 18 months
What
of
changed?
just like, it's really interesting. I think about it often. I think I changed my perspective, and I found that, I'd wake up some days and be like, well, this is where I am. So what am I going to do to make the best of it? And I don't know that the people around me would have said like, yeah, you didn't like coming to work, but, I felt like it was kind of a duty, like an I have to do versus an I want to do. And I had this really exciting career and I loved the people I worked with. And now it's like, oh my God, now I'm responsible for all these people and they have all these issues and I have to help them find solutions. And, it's a lot of challenges in the restaurant industry, right?
Absolutely.
A lot of balls to keep in the air. But I'll tell you that one of my real big life and career learnings was that when I told myself finally, like, you need to get over this, this is where you are, and we're either going to decide to build this business or we're going to get out of this business, because sitting here and being unhappy about being in this business is not helping anybody. When I changed that perspective, I was like, suddenly I fell in love with it.
Yeah.
And I really, like, I kind of took these blinders off that I had put on and saw like, wow, I have this really great team of people who work for me and they're really amazing and they're interesting people and like they have these great ideas, and if I can listen to them more and collaborate more with them, they ultimately want to make my life easier and better, right?
I love
So
that.
stop fighting it. And so, it's probably, like I said, it was somewhere like 6, 12, 18 months later that I really changed my perspective. And I think that was also, and my husband and I were like, we can really grow this business.
Yeah.
So, 2015 to 2016, we opened one restaurant in 2016, which was in Orange Beach, Alabama. So about the same driving distance as Pensacola.
6 locations total.
Yep, 6 locations. Then there was a couple opportunities that presented themselves in 2017. And when we decided, like, yeah, we're going to do this in 2017, we actually opened 3 restaurants in 2017. But the one is the building that we're in now, which was a replacement for our original location, which the lease was running out. We were at the 10 years of our lease, and we did not have a renewal. So that's another learning. We would never sign a lease for less than 20 years now, with options, at least, with the options equaling 20 years. So, we had to move location. So we opened 3 restaurants in 2017, and then we kind of got on track and did 3 in 2018. And then 2019, I think we opened 4.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
5, almost 5.
Okay. So what has been the biggest challenge in scaling?
Hiring people.
Yeah.
That I would say that everything else significantly pales in comparison to how strained the job market is in hospitality right now. It's just so many restaurants. It's such an explosion of restaurants and, people really dining out. I think that's going to change a bit as we're coming out of COVID. We're seeing a lot of bankruptcies and closures and, really unfortunate situations. But
there's going to be a period where if you survive this, it's going to be good.
Yeah. It'll be easier to hire really top quality people.
But I think the explosion that's going to come.
Yeah. But right
once
now,
things
it's
recover,
the hardest it's ever been right now. Harder than it's ever been in our 12 years,
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Real quick with the subject before COVID, like what were your best practices for finding and retaining and getting good people?
I personally think that most of the best people we have were brought in at lower levels and grown to the positions that they're in.
Yes.
And using referrals, really relying on your high-performing internal people to recommend other high performers that they've worked with elsewhere. Because, most people don't want to put their name on the line unless they know someone's going to perform, right?
Yeah.
And they know what they like about your culture and working for you, and they, I think, can then assess, like, would this other person be a good fit and also like working for this company?
Birds of the same feather flock together, like they say, right? So how has being a part of Liberty's Kitchen served you? Because I know that I'm assuming that you probably have gotten a lot of great folks from their program.
Yeah, so Liberty's Kitchen grew up in this same neighborhood as we are home officed and based and, kind of got our start, Mid-City, New Orleans. And
put a stop there real quick. If you guys aren't familiar with Liberty's Kitchen, go back to my episode with Dennis Bagneris. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. Great episode, what they're doing over there at Liberty Kitchen. Sorry, I just wanted to let people know.
Yeah, so Liberty's Kitchen, kind of got their start here in New Orleans. They're one of a couple of these kind of social nonprofit focused restaurant training entities, but with a cafe front. And so one of my kind of original general managers is the one who connected us with them, and said, hey, like, here, they're a resource. We could be hiring people coming out of this program. We should talk to them. Connected us, and then that initial kind of conversational discussion grew into, at that time we already had, I think, three if not 4 locations, grew into, hey, we could actually become part of their training process. So for a period of time, we were one of their key externs. So people in like week 6 of their program or whatever it might have been, I'm just throwing out week 6 as an example, would come spend 2 weeks in our restaurant. They'd pick a position, and then we would guarantee like we could find a location to put them in. And so we'd have the chance to work with the individuals for a couple of weeks. Then they'd go back and finish their program, and they could say if they were interested in working for us, and we could say if we were interested in having them work with us. And so we, over time hired many people. In a lot of cases, they didn't last and stay long term because they had other aspirations, but they needed, this was like their first stepping stone. In some cases, they've had folks who went on to culinary school and, come and work more in like fine dining and things like that, or who probably one of our, kind of highest potential Liberty's Kitchen hires, he ended up, after not having a high school diploma, one of the things that they do is help them get their GED. So he had his GED. He worked for us. We had him kind of on a path to move him into a leadership position. He opted to go to college. He went and got a college degree. He now works back for Liberty's Kitchen in a programming position and helps train other students who are coming through. And what's interesting about their program is it's aimed at, kind of disadvantaged youth or distressed youth in that kind of 16 to 24 years old, typically don't have their high school diploma. A lot of times will have, lots of different life challenges, whether from, kind of their home background or other things. And they really help work through all aspects of their life and what those barriers are that keep them from being successful. Yeah. And then really give them like the kind of the social worker type support. Yeah. Of like, what do you need to know?
And I kind of feel like maybe this is like out of place, easier said than done. But I feel like that's almost like all of our responsibilities as business owners. It's not just transactional, but
right.
Like, we have a obligation. We're hiring young people to give them more than just do your job skills.
Right.
Like to show them how to balance a P&L, and to like all these like little things are like we should teach them as much as what we know as possible.
And even in some instances, one of the things that I learned from working with that program for so many years, we continue to work with them, is that the things that we were learning by working with Liberty's Kitchen students and graduates were valuable lessons that we could also use with our regularly recruited employees, because they're, some of the same challenges, like the person who's chronically 15 minutes late. Have you sat down and actually had a conversation where you understand that the bus comes every hour? Yeah. They can either come to work 45 minutes early or they can come to work 15 minutes late. Why don't we reach a negotiation, a compromise that says what's the right time that they should get there? And it just takes the dialogue to understand, like, hey, this is something that's outside their control. They take public transit. Yeah. How do we work through that?
Absolutely. I love this. Before we go to the speed round, I want to pick your... I shouldn't use that expression, pick your brand. Some people really don't like it. The more I hear it, the more I don't like it. But I use it anyway. How are you handling COVID-19? Not so much how you handled it, but how you plan to handle it going forward. How you plan to adapt and adopt, to change your business to be able to best move forward.
So I think some of the key things really around like the health and safety protocols that we've put in place are going to be with us for a long time, right? And so we have to just make those the business norm and the expectation and get away from an idea that this is just temporary. Having socially distanced seating, I don't think is going to go away anytime soon. So if we were to open a new restaurant and design a new restaurant, you have to have that design in mind. I think smaller table sizes, right? A lot of states have limits on how big the parties can be, where in the past we might have built areas that were designed to house, 25 or 30 people or very large tables. That's probably not the reality that we're going to be in for at least the next year to 18 months. How much space you give to like the bar and bar seating, which in many locations is not allowed right now, and how you instead use that as normal seating. I think outdoor seating has become such high demand, and rightfully so. And so really being thoughtful and very specific on, how much outdoor seating do you need and what are you going to invest to make those outdoor spaces as welcoming and comfortable and part of that guest experience. Right now, it's a bit of an afterthought because it's add-on far beyond what we had in our restaurants before. But as we get the opportunity, how do you beautify them? How do you make sure, you put the fans, you put the music, you put the plants in, all the sort of stuff that makes that guest experience. The way that we spend, money decorating and designing our interiors, I think we have to spend on much larger exteriors now. Awesome. So I think those are some of the key things. And then really the level of kind of interaction that we have to have with employees and make sure that they understand that what the symptoms are, that they really cannot come to work with these symptoms. If they start to experience them, they need to leave. And, wearing masks, wearing face coverings, they're so critical to maintain the health and safety of your employees and your guest base. And so I think many of those things, will be with us for a long time. Yeah.
Thank you for getting into that. And thank you for sharing so much great advice during this conversation. I've had a blast. One question I'm asking all my guests before going to the speed round is the mission statement is to inspire, empower, and transform the industry. So how have you personally transformed over this 12 years now? Or is it since 2008, 12 years now?
How have I personally transformed? I would say that, first of all, I love this industry now. That's a big transformation for me. I kind of got into it as something to do for my community and never really thought of it as, kind of what was it doing for me personally as a leader. And now I'm so focused on, how do you develop a great team and how do you help people see the greatness that they have in them that they often don't see for themselves, and like how do you bring those things out? And that's why I get up in the morning. That's why I come to work. It's really all about the staff and the staff then making those guests happy. So how do you bring that out? How do you let people see what greatness they have? I think it's about like really good communication and helping people, having what, maybe are sometimes hard conversations and pointing out, when maybe somebody's doing something that's not giving them a great perspective from their employees' standpoint, or where they could have approached the situation differently and kind of talking through how could you do it different next time. To me, it also goes back to like knowing your people. So one of the things that I pride myself on in terms of, how I've developed as a leader is that I've been very focused in growth, that I never want this place to feel cookie cutter. I want every one of these locations and these management teams and staff to feel special and unique as they are, and, kind of to fit into their neighborhoods and feel like a really cool spot. And be, from a guest perspective, it's their neighborhood breakfast and brunch restaurant. It's not some mega chain or, kind of not getting corporatized. Yeah. And so we consciously work towards that because that's not the way I want it to feel. And I don't want to feel that way. But I think one of the things that ties into that is that I really focus on knowing all of my employees' names and like actually talking to them. So when powerful. I come into the restaurant and I see somebody that I haven't met before, I have this really crazy trick. I introduce myself. So it's like, man, if you just actually say, hi, I'm Jennifer. I haven't met you before. What's your name? And, how long you've been here? Where'd you come from before? And that's great. And I have a lot of tricks on how I remember people's names because, pre-COVID, we had, just over 600 employees. And I certainly can't remember
gonna
everyone's
say, there's
name,
no way.
like just off the top of my head, but I remember a very high percentage of them,
That's
and I have
great.
some tricks to remember the rest. So
We're back, and the first question I have for you is, what is your it factor? A habit, a trait, a characteristic you believe most contributes to your success?
I am a world-class sleeper.
Nice. What's a good night's sleep look like for you?
7 to 8 hours.
I love it. What time do you wake up?
Between 5 and 6 a.m.
Yeah, get to bed early.
Yeah, I have a coffee rule that goes with that. I never drink coffee afternoon.
There you go. What is your biggest weakness?
I'm opinionated. I have, I'm a New Yorker by, that's where I grew up, and I'm definitely, my New York can come out sometimes.
What is one question you ask or thing you look for when you're building a team?
Adaptability.
Okay.
And a really great attitude.
Nice. What is your biggest challenge today?
Hiring people.
How are you overcoming it? You said, 2 new hires out there.
I know, pounding the pavement. Our team is just everybody. It's all hands on deck, and everybody's a recruiter. Everybody's got their networks out there. It's really difficult.
Do
now.
you offer incentives if you have an employee who
We
recruits
do.
you?
We have referral bonuses.
Nice.
Right now, we have some pay incentives
What are
related
they?
to back of house. We're paying all of our back of house employees, all our cooks, $20 an hour, and our dishwashers $15 an hour.
Well, for referrals though.
Oh, for referrals, we typically pay, it might be like $100
Nice.
up to like $250 depending on the market.
That's a great deal for like a 18,
Yeah.
17, 19-year-old. Like
Yep.
that's awesome.
Yep.
All right. Share one code of conduct or behavior you teach your team. It's a core value, a way to be, a way to act.
Gracious.
Gracious. What is graciousness to you?
So to me, it's about giving other people grace and recognizing that while we want to show up with our best selves, we don't always, and we don't know what other people's story is. So,
Yeah.
kind of giving people a little more benefit of the doubt,
I love it.
our coworkers, our guests, instead of like kind of jumping to that mode where you get defensive or you're upset about something. And we have a saying in the South that helps really kind of goes hand in hand with being gracious when you're not feeling gracious, which is bless your heart.
What is one uncommon standard of service you teach your staff? So this is something that's common within the 4 walls of your restaurants to go above and beyond, but not common throughout the industry.
So we have one of our, kind of core value concepts that's called lagniappe. Lagniappe is a Creole French word, and it means a little something extra. And so for us, we have this idea of lagniappe, and we talk about it both from how we treat each other and from how we treat the guests. So, for example, if you told us it was your birthday, we might, and you ordered some pancakes, we might turn those into a stack of birthday cake pancakes for you.
I love it. What is one book that's a must-read to make us a better person or restaurant owner?
Ooh, I don't read a lot of business books that are about restaurants, but I think probably Danny Meyer's Setting the Table is my favorite.
What is your non-restaurant favorite book?
My current favorite book is Glennon Doyle's Untamed, and I think it's a must-read for women and women leaders.
What was the big takeaway from that book?
That women have a tendency to conform ourselves to many other people's expectations for our entire lives, and it often takes us to, kind of into our 40s to realize just how much we constrain ourselves and how life-changing it can be for ourselves and for people around us if we actually put ourselves first a bit more, and how we can show up as better people to everybody else by doing that.
Great stuff. What is one thing you feel restaurateurs don't do well enough or often enough?
Really talk to their staff and really understand, kind of what it's like on the front line. I personally think it's really important to spend time in your business, but don't be so in your business that you can't work on your business.
I love it. Share one service you've outsourced to a company that's doing something better than you could ever do it in-house that you outsource to do that thing.
I would say one of the things that I felt has been most important to outsource is food safety and sanitation auditing. And we've used a few different companies over the years. We currently use Steritech. But really having that outside set of eyes that comes and tells you how are you doing compared to other restaurants. It holds your staff accountable in an area where you really have zero room for error.
Exactly.
But we move so fast in restaurants that, there are small problems that can compound over time. And so really and we know in a lot of markets, health inspectors do not do the level of detail that we need them to. And so, using that third party means that in all 5 states that I operate, I have every restaurant held to the same standard, and I can compare them to each other.
Beautiful. What is one technology you've adopted within your restaurant that's had a huge impact on operations, communications, Wow, I'm struggling. You can tell this is my last interview of the week. Efficiency is what I was trying to say. Anything along those lines.
Yeah, so we're, as engineers, we are very technology focused. We love technology, and we are early adopters. I would say what it's currently called Yelp Waitlist, but it used to be No Wait when it was independent. We were the first adopter of No Wait in New Orleans way back when we opened our second restaurant. So this was 8 years ago or something. And I think that waitlist process has been really a game changer for us, in particularly as popular as our restaurants are during peak times, and like letting people have that flexibility to get on the list from home or from their hotel or while they're in the car. And it's really been, particularly now in COVID, where you don't want a lot of people congregating and waiting together. Having them on the list and being able to communicate to them through the text is really helpful.
Nice. And this is actually, we're going to start asking a new question. I'm going to do my best to start asking it. It's actually a question from my man Casey over here. What is one nonprofit that you are really excited about that you want to create more awareness of, or a nonprofit you partner with? We already talked about the Liberty's Kitchen. Is there another one, or is there one you want to put more emphasis on that?
Well, so I'm a big believer in giving back to the community. Aside from serving on the board at Liberty's Kitchen, I also served on the board for my children's public charter school for several years. I spend a lot of time, and where I can donate money, kind of into education, that's really my big thing. I think that's kind of the life-changing, game-changing in most cities, but especially in New Orleans. And so, anything, Liberty's Kitchen is kind of that beautiful intersection of the two things I'm passionate about now, which is restaurants and education. And, they're really focused on that. So I think they do a great job with both of those things. So
I love it. And this is the last question. It's a doozy. Get ready for it. If you got the news, you're leaving this world tomorrow. All the memories of you, your work, and your restaurants would be lost with your departure, with the exception of 3 pieces of wisdom that you could leave behind for the good of humanity and for your legacy. What would those 3 pieces of wisdom be?
It's always and only about the people. The early bird does catch the worm. I believe in that. So and we're early bird. We're early folks, and keep the balance. You have to be in a good mental space to show up and be the leader that your team needs them to be. And that means you have to have time outside your business as well.
Jennifer, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on to share your story, your knowledge, and your mentorship. We wrap up every chat by calling somebody out. So who's one person you respect and admire and believe would make a great guest mentor like you made for us today? If they were on the show, you would listen to it.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, that's a tough one.
You can mention more if you can't think of just one.
I really, there's so many great New Orleans restaurateurs and chefs. One that really interests me is Nina Compton, who is a amazing chef and one Top Chef, in fact. And she and her husband, Larry Miller, own a couple restaurants here in New Orleans. And I kind of know them as acquaintances, but I would love to know more about their story.
Well, your wish is been answered. We got her on the show yesterday,
awesome.
So we'll be sure to let you know when that goes live.
That's exciting.
Thank you so much. If we wanted to connect, maybe come join your team. I know you're expanding throughout the Gulf area. What's the best way to connect?
The best way to connect with us is on social at Ruby Slipper Cafe or at Ruby Sunshine Brunch, and our websites rubyslippercafe.com and rubysunshine.com.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jennifer,
Thank
for coming on the
you.
show. There is no questioning. You are unstoppable.